I am Madame Sarah Bernhardt, and I am dying. At the age of 79, I am dying. My son Maurice has covered my unconscious body with wildflowers. The priest has said the last rites, as my body stubbornly clings to the few last breaths. And the crowds of loving and loyal Parisians encircle my house to say goodbye. Dear God, what a life I have led. And quand même, there are few, if any, true regrets. They say that when you die, your whole life, it passes before you. And I suppose that is what is happening to me now. As I cling here between heaven and hell, and the road will be close on that one. But for me, there is no heaven except inside the hallowed halls of a theater. By 36, I had conquered the hearts of England, France, Europe, and North America to become the world's greatest actress. The stories are all true. Throughout my 61-year career, I did everything in my power to become famous, and everything I needed to remain famous. At 70, I could still conjure the glamour of youth and play St. Joan of Arc. I would stand there teary-eyed and defiant and cry, "I am a maid of 19!" And the audience would cheer with acceptance. I loved being idolized. But I don't know what was my greatest achievement, that they could accept me as 19 or as a virgin. From Montreal to Mombasa, I traveled the world, playing all the great classics in all the great theaters, and always in French. Yes, I am speaking to you in English. Dying has a way of making one more accommodating. But my life, it was not filled with endless triumphs. Quand même, in spite of everything, I was a great actress. My childhood was beyond my control. I was born October 23rd, 1844, at, how you say, a very young age, to Louise Martin. She was Dutch by birth, with a Jewish mother and a Catholic father. It all began when Mama, she left home at the age of 14, and she became a milliner by profession. She was utterly gorgeous. She was swept off her feet, literally, one day to Paris. She was imported by a Frenchman who wanted to conquer the world, one woman at a time. He was handsome, he was dashing, and completely unscrupulous. And once they arrived back in Paris, he promptly abandoned her. So Mama, she found another milliner to work for her until she found another man. Edouard Bernhardt, my father. Mama never minded if a man loved and left her as long as he left her enough. So that resolved, she decided to apply her talents to a more profitable profession. And she became a courtesan. But don't be shocked. The French admire a woman who can love a man for all he's worth. That was an inconvenience. So Mama, she brought her younger sister Rosine to Paris to join her in her new enterprise. And they judiciously shipped me off to be raised in the country. And then off to a Catholic school, a convent. All paid for by my Catholic father, who recognized his financial responsibilities. Catholic guilt is a wonderful thing. But after 8 years at the Grand Champs convent, Mama came and fetched me home. Home. I was going home at long last. At the age of 15, I was pleased and proud to finally have a home. And my home, it was a demi-bordello, inhabited by 2 well-dressed and languorous women, Mama and Aunt Rosine. And Mama, she was living with Napoleon's surgeon. He was a man who embodied all the vices I deplored, and none of the virtues I admired. Well, Aunt Rosine, she had garnered herself no less than the Duc de Mornay. He was the bastard half-brother to Napoleon. And quite the diplomat. He could tell you to go to hell so tactfully you'd be looking forward to the trip. And by then, I had two younger half-sisters. My younger sister, Regina, and my middle sister, Jean. They both possessed a beauty I could never equal. In a world where beauty was all. They had never left my mother's side. During those years away from Mama, I nurtured a storybook fantasy that my mother cherished and adored me. But in truth, it was only Jean who elicited her maternal instincts. Thank God for Madame Gerard. She was a widow on the floor above us. I called her my little lady because it was her unconditional love. For the next 40 years, that would be the only maternal love I would never know. I liked the beauty of my sisters. They stuck out like a sore thumb in Mama's world of heavy velvet drapes and mirrored walls. So Mama, she wanted to marry me off as soon as possible, until one fateful moment one night. The course of my life changed forever. A notary arrived, and in front of everyone, including the Duc de Mornay, he announced that my father was bequeathing me 100,000 francs towards my dowry. I don't want his money, I screamed at the notary. I intend to dedicate my life to God. I shall return to the convent and become a nun. And Mama, she screamed in shock. How can you say such things to me, Sarah? So I threw myself at Mama. I cried for my eyelids, my hair, my fingers, my heart. My whole being was awash. And then the Duc de Mornay, he paused to light his cigar. His face was a mixture of boredom and puzzled amusement. He remarked, I think the child has a gift for theater. And he walked out. And no sooner had he uttered those fateful words, I found myself dressed and climbing the steps to the Comédie Française to see Britannicus. I had never attended a real play before. I had no idea of what awaited me. The theatre was swathed with men and women in their elegant best, and gigantic crystal chandeliers they blazed high above, with prismatic shimmers vying for attention and glittering gems and sparkling monocles on a sea of plush, red velvet seats. And suddenly, the dizzying hum of voices subsided and waves of satin white curtains rose. And Britannicus entered. I was completely fixated, inundated with the beauty of Racine's verses, the actors, and this overwhelming divine certainty that this stage, this existence would be my destiny. And the hand of that destiny was the Duc de Mornay, who gained my entrance into the conservatory. For everything in life you want to do, there are 50,000 people who want to do the same thing. So to achieve success, I threw myself into my work, which consisted on one hand of learning and remembering and understanding the lines, and on the other side, I had to learn to ignore the advice of my professors. I mean, this monsieur, he wanted me to be natural, and that monsieur, he wanted me to be sophisticated. Both claimed to be the definitive expert on the art of theatre, and neither of them ever agreed on anything. But in truth, my dears, it doesn't really matter. Either you possess an instinctive innate talent, or you don't. So with the considerable influence of the Duc de Mornay, little Sarah was accepted into the inner sanctum of France's first theatre, the Comédie Française. Here was a stage. It was vast, mysterious, eerie in its barrenness. The darkened theatre sent shivers through my body. It was there where I debuted in the role of Iphigenie. On the afternoon of my debut, I spent the whole afternoon on the Rue de Faux. I was looking at theatre posters. My eyes were glued to the one advertising the first performance of Mademoiselle Sarah Bernhardt. At 5:30, I walked into the theatre. My knees shook so much I staggered like a drunkard. I was immobilized by fear, paralyzed by doubt. My arms were lamed, my feet were knotted to the floor, my teeth chattered like castanets. As the cowboy shouted that the curtain was rising. As I walked on stage, I knew the curtain was rising on the rest of my life. That night, my whole career had seemed laid out for me. To my young mind, I didn't think that my life should follow such a steady path. And of course it didn't. Disaster, it was lurking just a few months away. For the celebration of Molière's birthday, the company always held this gala gathered before his bust to pay him homage. And this would be the first time I would play a part in that ceremony. My little sister Regina, she begged to come with me. But I adored her, so I acquiesced. The disaster came in the unfortunate, portly form of Madame Nathalie. That Bernhardt old car shoved my sister Regina into a pillar for accidentally stepping on her train and bloodied her nose. So I slapped the dreadful old cretin over the face, and she fainted on the spot. The next day, the manager of the Comédie Française demanded I publicly apologize to Madame Nathalie. I refused. I was expelled, and I was all of 18 years old. Comes man. In spite of everything, I would become a great actress. So I did not care. I kept on performing, acting in a few shows at the Gymnase Theatre, which is where I met and fell passionately in love with the gallant Prince Henri de Ligne of Belgium. Henri was to father the only true and constant love throughout my life, my son Maurice. However, after a long and passionate affair, when I announced my pregnancy to Henri, the gallantry was gone. He looked at me with a regal toss of his brow and said, Madame, when one sits on a bunch of thorns, how can one be sure which thorn has pricked her? Mon dear, there was only one prick, and he was it. Prince Charming? Oui. A knight in shining armor, no. Despite it all, I would become a great actress. And I was now 20 and a single mother. But in 1866, I was blessed with a kind offer to join the Odeon Theatre. At the Odeon, it was talent that mattered. It was like this great dark factory in which we, as joyous jewelers of our art, we cut the precious stones furnished us by the poets. My career had finally taken flight until it was rudely interrupted by war. War. How vehemently I hated the infinite grief it caused. When war with Germany was announced, I sent my family to safety, and I stayed in Paris with my little lady, Madame Girard, where I played the real-life role of a war nurse at a makeshift hospital we set up at the Odeon. December 27th, 1870, the bombardment of Paris began. It was one of the coldest winters in history, and the sick and wounded needed heat. So I burned all the little property crates, the theater seats, armchairs, benches. I did anything to keep them alive. Night after night, we would hear the lugubrious cry of ambulance! Ambulance! As a sad procession of carriages full of wounded soldiers arrived. The men were laid out in beds of blood-stained straw, and the bombs exploded like fireworks, illuminating the sky with their terrifying beauty and then fragmenting, raining death and destruction. One night, my surgeon, he came to see a patient who was very ill. He needed a prescription immediately, so he sent his young apprentice, Victor, around the corner to retrieve it at once from his law pharmacy. He was an adorable little scamp. I called him Toto, and he had gone only a few meters when I clapped my hands and I shouted, "Come back!" as he was split open by a shell, which struck the child full in the chest and exploded. His poor entrails, they were spilled all over the ground, and his angelic little face, it was rendered of all his skin. The face, son's nose, son's eyes, son's everything, but bloody strips of fabric and bones. Still, the bombardment of Paris continued. One night, the Christian brothers came seeking hands and carriages to bring the dead back from the battlefield. When I gave them 2 carriages, I decided to go myself to help them. Mon Dieu. But a Dante-esque horror awaited me. Who never shake the horror of gleaming the battlefield at night for sparks of life in a few wounded soldiers' eyes, to take them back to the hospital, or simply hold their hands until they died.